The question a lot of people are asking, although a lot of people think they have the answer, is the president a racist? Joining us now, CNN political commentator Jason Miller and Anna Navarro. Guys, I've known you both for a long, long time. I know there are strong feelings about this. To the extent that I can, I'm going to let you guys talk. Let's see how it goes. Anna, first to you, your reaction to what we've heard the last day.
I can't even believe that you're asking the question if, President Donald J. Racist is a person who's a bigot and is in the White House. Of course he is. When a person shows you who they are, believe them the first time. He has shown us throughout his life. He showed us throughout his campaign. He has shown us throughout his time as president. He is not going to change. A 71-year-old racist is not going to see Jesus and come to a different conclusion and a different heart at this stage in life. This is who he is, and it's up to the rest of us in America to say that that is not who America is. The reason I'm so pissed off about this, John, is because I live in Miami. Miami is a vibrant city that has been built by people who come from shitholes. People like me, people like the Haitians who are working in our restaurants, who work in our hospitals, who are taking care of our children, of our elderly, who are doctors and lawyers and vibrant parts of this community. And today the message they need to hear is that we are with them, that they are part of this community, they are part of this country, and they are what makes America great already.
Tonight, the great national debate about is Donald Trump a racist appears to be over. The debate started 8 years ago in earnest in 2011 when Donald Trump first started talking about President Obama's birth certificate. That's when I started using the word racist about Donald Trump on this program. References to Donald Trump as a racist slowly increased over time, but they were always met with challenges. How do you know he's a racist? And the American news media has gone through years now of hair splitting on the difference between saying something racist and being a racist, as if there is a difference. Historians will not go through the same struggle that the American news media has been going through for years over whether Donald Trump is and always has been a racist, an overt racist exactly like his father. Historians will match Donald Trump's language as a presidential candidate in 2016 to the segregationist Alabama Governor George Wallace's language when he ran for president in 1968. And historians will see that it is virtually the same, as we showed you that comparison between George Wallace and Donald Trump during the last presidential campaign. George Wallace's campaign manager from 1968 came on this program to tell you that when he listened to Donald Trump campaigning, he was hearing George Wallace campaigning. Donald Trump's racism will be very clear to historians, and it will be in the congressional record because freshman Congressman Tom Malinowski of New Jersey has introduced a resolution tonight in the House of Representatives, supported fully by the leadership of the House of Representatives and guaranteed a vote. And that resolution condemns, quote, President Trump's racist comments directed at members of Congress. The resolution, quote, strongly condemns President Donald Trump's racist comments that have legitimized and increased fear and hatred of new Americans and people of color by saying that our fellow Americans who are immigrants and those who may look to the president like immigrants should go back to other countries, by referring to immigrants and asylum seekers as invaders, and by saying that members of Congress who are immigrants or those of our colleagues who are wrongly assumed to be immigrants do not belong in the Congress or in the United States of America. This resolution will help define Donald Trump in history, and the president's latest racist outbursts will help define Republican members of Congress in history. Tonight, the editorial board of the Charlotte Observer in Charlotte, North Carolina, published an editorial entitled, "Are You Okay with a Racist President, Republicans?" And so there it is, in a mainstream newspaper, in a headline, racist president. The editorial says our leaders need to stand up and say something. But the editorial board pointed out, quote, the Republican Party is firmly Donald Trump's party now. They're bowing to the worst of who we are.
I'm going to drop the knowledge. Going to send you back to college. Got to reverse it before they get the whole world to rehearse it. Something you thought has extraordinary powers. Something you said has made me cower. The birth of a new deity in this final hour. Get rid of habeas corpus, the right to ignore us. In all caps like the Matrix, faking news just to play tricks on your mind and your kind. Nothing serious just because it rhymes. Got you listening to verses, got you accepting the curses spoken in several languages. Collateral damage making human languishes until you don't know what time it is. So gotta reverse it before they get the whole world to rehearse it. Welcome to T's reVerse, where we drop the knowledge. I voted for Barack Obama in 2008, and I lost a bunch of white friends because of it. For some reason, I wasn't allowed to vote in the last election. I believe I was told it was because I had changed from Democrat to Independent, which meant that I couldn't vote since there was no independent candidate. Now, in case you think I'm suggesting some racial bias or voter suppression here, I'm not. I have white friends who had the exact same experience in California, so I didn't vote for President Trump. But I don't hate him like I'm supposed to. Like most of my black friends believe I should because their white Democratic massa said they should. We sick too, massa. But I reverse. My white liberal friends feel the same way. Now, admittedly, President Trump's brand of shock jock politics can be off-putting. But like I do for all human beings, I at the very least attempt to understand the method to someone's madness. I attempt to find redeeming qualities in every human being. But when all else fails, I can still respect their humanity. So in the purest sense of the word, I can respect them. Respect meaning to look again. Re means again, and spectos means to look. I may not like you personally, but I will forever respect your humanity. But it's not about you. It's about the God in you. So regardless of what you think of him personally, President Trump was elected, not born into that position. Likewise, no matter what you think about him, it's wrong to vilify, hate, or to cast aspersions on the people who voted for him, dismissing them as white supremacists, regardless of what you individually feel about them. But before I go too far afield, I want to remind everyone that many of the President Trump supporters did and said similar things to those who voted for former President Barack Obama, particularly if you were so-called black.
You voted for him just because he was black.
Was the refrain I heard a million times from many of my so-called white colleagues. No, I voted for him because, in my opinion, he was the most qualified candidate. You know, I think it's laughable that many so-called white people who want to believe that narrative that black people can't be objective about Obama or OJ. Oh no, I shouldn't have mentioned him, should I? We be sorry. Are the very ones today sobbing in their German imported beer for being singled out and picked on. Now, to be fair, voting for the likes of the late Marion Barry, who twice was convicted of crack cocaine and was caught with numerous prostitutes, as well as the myopic veneration of Al Sharpton, just to name a few examples, does call into question our objectivity, or at the very least, a willingness to judge other so-called black people by the content of their character. But perhaps that's a result of the snitch culture that is still so pervasive in our communities. But again, I reverse. Still, I don't remember any Republican leaders calling for or condoning violence against those who voted for President Obama. And where was Antifa then? Many so-called black people have been calling the police state a fascist regime for decades. So where were you, Antifa, during the Obama administration? Why weren't you protesting alleged police brutality and violence against black men along with Black Lives Matter? That's right. You're only angry now that President Trump's in office. 2016 was ground zero for you, but I reverse. There are things that pass through the bloodline that don't surface in our children, grandchildren, or even great-grandchildren, but eventually they surface. Racism is sort of like that. It's like an inherited disease that lies dormant until something in the environment triggers it. There is no effort required. It shows up, and when it does, it often surprises even you. You didn't know you were a carrier. You never had a racist bone in your body, and you still don't per se. It's deeper than that. It's in the marrow of the bone. It is in the blood. There's an old Chinese proverb that says, if you want to know what water is, do not ask the fish. In other words, sometimes we are so immersed in a thing that we cannot see it objectively. So if you want to know what a racist is, you should never ask an American. Racism and America are fraternal twins that have grown up together. They both share a similar birthright and experience. They were raised by the same parents who framed the Constitution, yet permitted chattel slavery and justified tribal genocide. Racism itself is so deeply entrenched in the American way of life that it is nearly imperceptible and thus inescapable. So much so that it seems highly unlikely that one can be born and raised in America and not be a carrier of the racism gene. Yes, I'm going there. Which is to say, all Americans have the seed of racism within them. But here's where the confusion begins. If you were to ask most Americans if they themselves are racist, they will deny the assertion vehemently. But if you were to ask them if they in fact know someone who is racist, most will respond with an emphatic yes. Now, having racism DNA doesn't necessarily mean you'll ever get an opportunity to be a racist. After all, that would require having power, wealth, or both. The power and wealth to deny people opportunities based on their so-called race. Still, being a carrier distorts reality, the way you look at the world, and the indoctrination you receive through public education further reinforces those stilted perceptions. Before I move on, allow me to clarify something. Most people confuse the words prejudice and racism, meaning they use them interchangeably. But racism and prejudice are two completely different normative realities, which come from two entirely different sources. Human beings are by nature prejudiced. Prejudging things is an inbuilt mechanism that enhances our chances of survival. For instance, the fear of fire is based on a real prejudice. But when this native system is repetitively manipulated and triggered by false information, the flight and fight response is overstimulated, and the offspring of prejudice and racism is then birthed. That is bigotry. Little wonder why America leads the developed world in the abuse of anxiety-relieving antidepressant drugs. When the checks and balances of reality is compromised, nothing is left but fear and confusion. And if we are to be totally honest, most Americans live in a perpetual state of fear, which is why the need for the proverbial other is so important. So back to the word racist. As a so-called black man in America, it is an absolute insult to hear people using the word racist in such a cavalier and irresponsible way. My forefathers deserve better than that. The quote-unquote black experience has taught us that the word racism has nothing to do with the way individuals act, or even what they say for that matter. It has always been about someone who has the power or authority to change what you say, how you behave, where you live, as well as what kind of education you receive and from whom. Which is to say, 99.9% of all Americans aren't even qualified to be racist. Oh sure, they can be prejudiced and they can support racist ideologies, but they themselves by definition cannot be racist as much as some might want to be. Most so-called white supremacists are no more than wannabes. They would love to have the power and influence to recreate the world in some kind of white utopia. But let's keep it 100. Most so-called black people, if given the chance, would do the same. Wakanda forever. So-called black people. It was just a movie, so get over it. No, seriously, Google Wakanda Forever and all this merchandise and organic oil suddenly appeared. You swear it was a real country in Africa. The movie Black Panther was a good movie and it made over $1 billion for Walt Disney Studios, but no real country in Africa saw a penny of that. But I suppose when you're so desperate and enamored by a reality you'd like to create, that you'll accept anything, even a fictional equivalent, which is why so many black people cannot stop themselves from idolizing, worshiping, or supporting Wakanda. No need to support real so-called black-owned businesses in low-income so-called black communities when you can just support Wakanda forever, right? But I reverse. You don't get to use the word racist anytime you want to shut someone up or shut them down. You certainly don't get to come from another country altogether and use it as a whipping boy against Americans as if you understand the uniqueness of American racism. You can speak out against injustice, but not racism. Which brings me to another point. When are so-called black leaders ever going to lead and stop misleading? I have an idea. Let's no longer follow them. Yes, unfollow them like you do people on Facebook who no longer value you. Unfollow them. Let me give you one glaring, obvious reason why you should unfollow them. Nearly everyone would agree that the cost of education has risen astronomically while the quality of education has declined precipitously for decades. Now, nowhere is this decline more profoundly understood than in the inner city. So when so-called black parents are presented with an option for school vouchers, which would allow their children to go to the schools of their choice, they tend to vote 2-to-1 in favor of them. But here's the rub. The question of school vouchers has been brought to the attention of so-called black leaders like Jesse Jackson probably hundreds of times, and every time, most, if not all, have poo-pooed the idea, even though their children and their grandchildren receive private and elite school educations. Now, it's not my intention to single out Jesse Jackson. However, this is the same Jesse Jackson that fought and campaigned for the legitimacy of Ebonics for the inner city youth back in the 1980s. Enough said. But again, I reverse. Nearly every Democratic candidate for 2020 has called President Trump a racist. Now, of course, as President of the United States, he is in a unique position to be the supreme racist. Indeed, it is inarguable that Donald Trump has been in position to potentially be a racist for a long time. Fame and fortune often afford that. But calling him one is quite different from him actually being one. Could it be that those who are passing judgment the loudest are simply doing so as a diversion, or perhaps they are using some form of projection? Because how is it that an entire political party can agree to view a person the same way when most people under the same roof can't agree what to eat for breakfast? See, it's not possible, unless, of course, there is a joint agreement. There is some greater agenda. Now, here's my main problem with the whole Trump is a racist thing. Before he became president, he was nearly revered in certain factions of the so-called black community, particularly with rappers. They made songs with him included in their lyrics, 67 times in fact. Rappers dropped his name in their lyrics. Trump's famous "You're Fired" from his reality TV show, The Apprentice, was repeated incessantly by adults and kids alike, by so-called whites and blacks. Which amongst them didn't admire, if not on some level desire, that kind of power? Now, in a community where Wakanda is real, the dream of having such power is always revered. But now, all of a sudden, every so-called black person wants to do an about-face. Well, why is that? What has changed? Let me attempt to explain it this way. I remember when it was cool to have a Doberman in rap videos, and every so-called black person in the hood had to have a Doberman. Then it was cool to have a Rottweiler, and every so-called black person had to have a Rottweiler. Then it was cool to have a pit bull, and now every so-called black person in the hood walks down the street with a pit bull. I guess they're just keeping it real. The moral of this story is this. The hip-hop community has had a profound impact on inner city culture, from sagging pants to smoking cigars and blunts to driving cars with 30-inch rims. Hip-hop culture has undeniably dictated inner city culture, so it's little wonder why so many are in lockstep now. But I reverse. Look, Americans are bigots. They've always been, which is to say Americans have always been byproducts of a system that has always wholly submerged them in the propaganda of American assimilation, like fish in water. So today we're raising an entire generation not to just be intolerant of other human beings or their ideas. We're raising little bigots. When statutes offend you more than statutes, then you're a bigot, plain and simple. Let me offer you the standard definition of a bigot and tell me if you don't see yourself. Webster's dictionary defines a bigot as follows: a person who is intolerant towards those holding different opinions. Now, the overwhelming majority of Americans aren't racist, nor are they merely prejudiced. They are ethnically prejudiced and socially prejudiced and class prejudiced. They divide themselves and segregate themselves across these imaginary lines of demarcation. They are a unique hybrid of both racism and prejudice, a historical chimera, if you will. They are bigots. Now, before you hang up on a brother, hear me out. Unlike racism, bigotry isn't nearly as obvious, but it is more functional. You can function quite comfortably as a bigot, sort of like the difference between being psychotic and neurotic. Most neurotics can function quite well with medication that helps them cope with reality. Again, little wonder why America leads the world in drug abuse. Most Americans are self-medicating, whether with marijuana, alcohol, Adderall, opioids, or any other reality-numbing drugs. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I did sleep at a Holiday Inn last night. Again, I reverse. What we're experiencing in America right now is a climate of bigotry going wild, and the flames are being fanned by the media, but not just the traditional media, but also the self-proclaimed mavens of social media. Here's a little non-scientific way to tell if you're a bigot or not. But before I administer the test, I want you to take a look at something. You're a so-called black man, and you're walking down the street with a coworker who just so happens to be a so-called white woman. Now, you're not walking arm in arm or holding hands, you're just walking together. You walk past a so-called black woman and receive the nastiest look she can muster. Now, you play it off. What's up with her? Maybe she was just having a bad day. A while later, you and your coworker are driving back to the office, and some white guy is at the corner waiting to make a right turn to enter traffic. Now, you have the right of way, but just as you get a little closer so you and your coworker can clearly be seen, he decides to veer out in front of you, almost causing you to slam on your brakes. Now, he's in front of you, and he's going slow. No, real slow. No, deliberately slow. So you ask yourself, did I do something? You try to play it off by dismissing it as that this guy is just a jerk, perhaps. Or maybe he was just having a bad day. Or maybe it was something altogether deeper. Okay, ready for your exam? How many black people have ever been in your home? How many white people have ever come to your home? The truth is, I don't care either way, but you lose credibility to cry racist until you have established real relationships with people who don't look like you. I want you to listen to something you may or may not already realize. Very few white people are born with silver spoons in their mouths. Oh, and by the way, very few black people are born into poverty or grow up dodging bullets and gangs. Not fundamentally understanding this doesn't make you a racist, but you are surely stoking your racist DNA and feeding your bigotry. Oftentimes, we call these stereotypes as if they are formed from thin air. If I say someone is athletic, can dance, or committed a crime, which group comes to mind? How about they're good at math or terrible drivers? Or they work in a field and they like soccer? Or they're born with privilege? Who and what comes to mind? But have you ever asked yourself why? Why do you think these things? See, I suppose we are all guilty of these to some degree, but the real question you must ask yourself is, do such stereotypes encourage or discourage your bigotry? If they affect the way you see and relate to other people, then yes, they encourage bigotry. We tend to project onto others what we refuse to see in ourselves. There would be no careless use of the word racist if there was more self-reflection and introspection, because we would recognize our own proclivity to become one. Still, no one is born a racist. In truth, it requires a uniquely toxic mix of environment and circumstances to become one. Thankfully, that disqualifies most of us. But this unbridled bigotry we have towards one another is just as ominous. The so-called soft bigotry that shows up in our vitriolic posts on social media, in truth, is more responsible for dividing us than what any national leader could possibly say. Remember, our leaders are always a reflection of us because they come from us. So we like to blame our hatred, prejudices, and bigotry on our leaders because it abnegates our personal responsibility for being haters. It makes us feel better about ourselves. If Trump, Obama, or any political leader is able to stir up hatred and anger in you, it's only because it was already there, lying dormant. Hating the man in the White House, or anyone for that matter, says more about you than them. It surely exposes something in you, perhaps the worst in you. This mass hysteria over a sitting president, which was created by miseducation, disinformation, bigotry, and fear, is completely irrational, if not scary, in the sense that it's impossible for everyone to hate one person, especially someone you don't know personally, unless, of course, you are mindlessly following the crowd. Now, there is strength in numbers, so on second thought, you could be a racist. You could qualify for one if you gathered enough people together and you focus your collective bigotry against one man or one group. With an army of groupthink radicals, you could prevent people from eating in restaurants if they didn't hate who you hate. You could threaten them with physical violence, with bodily harm if they wore certain clothing like MAGA hats. You could insult them publicly and cyberbully them on social media. You could refuse them employment or suspend, demonetize, and delete their social media accounts. And in short, you could make their lives a living hell. And isn't that what we're doing? What we're teaching our children to do? See, you call me racist, but only because in your heart of hearts you realize that by doing so, you weaken your opportunity to learn something about yourself. And as Americans, we are definitely afraid to look at ourselves. You can call me racist, but you are only playing into their hands. Their hope, the small minority who frankly are the only ones in position to be actual racists, is that you'll never be able to identify who and what is a real one. This is T's reVerse. If your peace requires me to be silent, then I'd rather have war. So walk in peace.